If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. And now, our story. The rain was falling hard over New York City on that October night. The drops beat against the glass window of the East Harlem General Hospital cafeteria with an almost hypnotic insistence, creating a constant rhythm that accompanied the hum of the old refrigerator and the distant murmur of voices in the hallways. Cameron Scott was sitting alone at one of the worn-out Formica tables with a half-eaten container of rice and beans when the old radio hanging on the wall began to report something that made her heart stop for a moment. The announcer's voice echoed through the nearly empty room. It was a story about a 12-year-old boy, the son of one of the city's real estate magnates, who had been rushed to a private hospital on the Upper East Side. The doctors were perplexed. The boy was presenting symptoms that didn't make sense together. Mental confusion, intense headaches that worsened at nightfall, a completely unstable heart rate. All the tests came back normal. It was as if his body was failing for no apparent reason. The prognosis was grim. The next 48 hours would be decisive. Cameron felt a tightness in her chest. Those words resonated within her like an echo from far away, from a time she tried every day not to remember. Her hands trembled around the plastic cup of cold coffee. She knew those symptoms. She knew each one of them with a painful clarity. 5 years ago, her brother Jacob had gone through the exact same thing. Jacob was only 3 years older than her, but he had always seemed to be the stronger of the two. He worked nights as a janitor in a commercial building in Midtown, a quiet, solitary job that allowed him to study during the day. Cameron still remembered the night everything changed. She was finishing her junior year of high school when she got the call. Jacob had collapsed at work. When she arrived at the hospital, he was already in serious condition, confusion, terrible headaches, a racing heart. The doctors ran dozens of tests, but nothing explained what was happening. Cameron, only 17 at the time, didn't understand much about medicine, but she understood observation. She noticed that Jacob improved during the day and worsened at night, always at night. She told the doctors, the nurses, anyone who would listen, but she was just a scared teenager. No one paid any real attention to what she was saying. No one believed it could be important. It was only later, when it was already too late, that they found out. An old, poorly maintained generator in the basement of the building where Jacob worked was releasing carbon monoxide. The gas rose through the ventilation ducts, invisible, odorless, lethal. Jacob spent the entire night breathing it in without knowing. During the day, away from the building, he would get better. At night, he would be poisoned again. By the time they finally figured it out, his body had already suffered irreversible damage. He survived, but he was never the same. He lost part of his memory, had difficulty concentrating, and suffered from anxiety attacks that left him paralyzed. He had to drop out of school. He had to abandon his dreams. And Cameron had to learn to live with the guilt of not having been able to make anyone listen. Now, sitting in that cafeteria with the smell of disinfectant mixed with the aroma of reheated coffee, she heard those same symptoms being described on the radio. The same pattern, the same progression, the same confusion from doctors who couldn't find the cause. And she knew. With every fiber of her being, she knew what was happening to that boy. Cameron stood up so quickly that her chair scraped against the floor with a jarring noise. A few people turned to look, but she barely noticed. Her heart was racing. She had to do something. She couldn't let it happen again. She couldn't stay silent while another body was slowly poisoned, while another family suffered, while doctors looked for answers in all the wrong places. She glanced at the clock on the wall. There were still 3 hours left in her shift, 3 hours of cleaning rooms, emptying trash cans, mopping the endless hospital corridors. But that boy didn't have 3 hours. He didn't have time. Cameron grabbed her worn-out backpack, ignored the curious glances from the other cleaning staff on their break, and left the cafeteria. Her worn-out sneakers made a muffled sound against the cold floor as she walked through the hallways she knew by heart. Working as a cleaner in a hospital had its advantages. You became invisible. No one really looked at you. No one questioned your movements. You were just part of the machine that kept everything running, but you were never recognized as someone who mattered. She passed the locker room, grabbed her thin jacket that wouldn't be enough against the rain outside, and headed for the back exit. The night air was cold and damp. The rain was still coming down hard, soaking everything. Cameron pulled up the hood of her jacket and started walking towards the bus stop. The hospital where the boy was admitted was on the other side of the city. She would have to take 2 buses, maybe 3, depending on the traffic. It would take at least an hour and a half. But she couldn't just call. She couldn't send a message. She already knew how that would go. A cleaning lady calling a private hospital, saying she knows what's wrong with a magnate's son? They would hang up on her before she even finished her sentence. No, she had to go in person. She needed to look someone in the eyes and make them understand the urgency of what she was saying. She needed to be heard, even if she had to beg for it. The first bus was crowded. Cameron found a spot near the window and watched the city pass by outside, blurred by the rain on the glass. New York City at night always seemed bigger than during the day. The lights from the buildings, cars, and streetlights created a mosaic of colors that reflected in the puddles on the streets. It was a city that never slept, but also one that never stopped to listen. She thought about Jacob. He now lived with their mother in a small apartment in the Bronx. He still tried to work, but the jobs never lasted long. The anxiety attacks kept him from maintaining a routine. His weak memory made him forget simple tasks. He was only 28, but he seemed to carry the weight of a lifetime of frustrations. And Cameron carried the weight of knowing that maybe, if someone had listened to her back then, things could have been different. The second bus was less crowded. She managed to sit down and took the opportunity to think about what she would say when she got to the hospital. How? Would she convince someone to listen to her? She wasn't a doctor. She wasn't a nurse. She didn't have a college degree. She had a high school diploma, a few technical courses from community programs, and 5 years of experience cleaning hospitals. But in those 5 years, she had observed, she had read everything she could find about carbon monoxide poisoning. She had talked to doctors and nurses when they were willing to talk. She had become a silent expert on a subject no one knew she had mastered. When the bus stopped near the hospital, it was past midnight. The rain had subsided to a fine drizzle. Cameron got off and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking at the imposing building in front of her. It was all glass and steel, illuminated by soft lights that seemed to convey a sense of tranquility and sophistication. It was so different from the hospital where she worked, so clean, so modern, so inaccessible. She took a deep breath and crossed the street. The reception area was spacious and quiet, with marble floors that echoed every step. There were abstract paintings on the walls, leather armchairs, a decorative fountain in the center. Everything was designed to impress, to remind visitors that this was a place for important people. Cameron felt small in there, her worn-out cleaning uniform still visible under her wet jacket. She approached the reception desk. The woman behind the computer had a professional and cold expression. Her eyes barely lifted from the screen as Cameron approached. "Good evening," Cameron began, trying to keep her voice steady. "I need to speak to someone about the patient who was admitted today. The boy with the neurological symptoms. It's urgent." The receptionist finally looked up at her, and Cameron could see the instant judgment in her gaze. The quick assessment of the cheap jacket, the worn-out sneakers, the tired posture of someone who works too much for too little. "Are you a relative of the patient, ma'am?" the receptionist asked, already knowing the answer. "No, but I have important information about his case. I think I know what's causing the symptoms. Please, I need to speak with the doctor in charge." The receptionist sighed, clearly annoyed. "Ma'am, I can't just let anyone speak with the doctors. If you're not family, there's nothing I can do. Besides, we have established visiting hours." Cameron felt frustration rising within her. But this is an emergency. The boy could be being poisoned by carbon monoxide. Every minute counts. "Please, I just need 5 minutes with someone who can listen to me." The receptionist picked up a pen and a notepad. Without looking at Cameron, she said, "I can take your message and pass it on to the responsible department." Cameron knew how this would work. The message would be written down, filed in some drawer, and never reach anyone who mattered. But she had no choice at the moment. She dictated her theory about carbon monoxide, explained the symptoms, mentioned the need for a specific carboxyhemoglobin test, She talked about the pattern of worsening at night. The receptionist wrote it all down with an expression of obvious boredom. When Cameron finished, the receptionist tore the sheet from the pad and placed it in a tray next to the computer. "All right, I'll pass it on," she said, in a tone that made it clear she would do no such thing. "You can leave now." Cameron stood there, looking at this woman who had the power to help, but chose indifference. She thought about begging, about screaming, about doing anything to be taken seriously, but she knew that would only make things worse. Instead, she nodded and turned to leave. She had reached the glass door when she saw, in the reflection, the receptionist pick up the paper with her notes and, without even looking at it, throw it in the trash. Cameron's blood boiled. She stopped, her hands shaking with anger and frustration. That piece of paper in the trash wasn't just a discarded sheet. It was Jacob's life being ignored all over again. It was this boy's chance being thrown away. It was everything. That was wrong with a system that only listened to those with money, power, or a degree hanging on the wall. Cameron left the hospital and stood under the entrance awning, watching the drizzle fall on the empty street. The city continued to move around her, indifferent. Cars passed, leaving trails of light. In the distance, she could hear the sound of a siren. Life went on, while a boy inside was slowly dying, and no one knew why. But Cameron knew, and she wasn't going to give up. She looked at her badge from East Harlem General that was still hanging around her neck. An idea began to form in her mind. It was risky. It could go very wrong. But standing there, helpless, knowing she could make a difference, was a worse option than any risk. Cameron checked the time. It was 2 a.m. The night shift was in full swing. Hospitals, even private ones, had a more relaxed routine at this hour. Fewer visitors, fewer supervisors circulating, more general fatigue among the staff. If she was smart, if she moved with confidence, she might be able to get in without drawing attention. She walked around the building, studying the entrances. There was the main entrance where she had just been kicked out, but there were also side entrances, service access points, loading and unloading areas. Every hospital had these spaces, places where employees came and went without passing through the main reception. She found what she was looking for at the back of the building, a metal door with a card reader. Next to it were large dumpsters and a makeshift smoking area. Cameron hid behind one of the dumpsters and waited. It didn't take long. After 15 minutes, a cleaning staff member came out, the door for a smoke. He swiped his card, the door unlocked with a click, and he held it open with his foot while he lit his cigarette. Cameron seized the moment when he turned to shield the flame from the wind and moved quickly, slipping through the door before it closed completely. She was in. The corridor was lit by fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly. The floor was grey linoleum, the walls painted beige. It was the part of the hospital that patients never saw. The backstage area, where the magic of medicine happened far from critical eyes. Cameron recognized the smell immediately. Disinfectant, cleaning products, institutional food coming from some distant kitchen. It was the smell of every hospital, rich or poor. She started walking through the corridors, keeping her head down, moving with the confidence of someone who belonged there. Her badge from East Harlem General was turned inward inside her jacket. From a distance, she could be just another employee doing her job. No one looked twice at the cleaning staff. She passed a break room where a few nurses were talking in low voices. She passed medication carts, supply closets, closed doors with signs indicating different departments. She needed to find the ICU. She needed to find that boy before it was too late. She followed the signs on the walls, always alert to the sounds around her. Approaching footsteps, voices echoing from adjacent corridors. Every time she heard something, she would hide behind a cart or pretend to be checking something on a shelf. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady. Finally, she saw the sign. ICU, Intensive Care Unit, with an arrow pointing to the right. Cameron followed the indicated direction and arrived at a double door of frosted glass. On the other side, she could see the gentle movement of people in scrubs. The lights were softer there, designed not to disturb the critically ill patients. She was about to push the door open when a firm hand grabbed her arm. "Miss, what are you doing here?" Cameron turned and met the eyes of a security guard. He was tall, in his 40s, with a serious but not hostile expression. His name tag read, Marcus. Cameron's heart leaped. She thought about running, but knew it was pointless. Instead, she looked him straight in the eye and told the truth. Need to save a boy's life. Marcus didn't let go of Cameron's arm immediately. His eyes studied her with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. He had worked security in hospitals long enough to recognize when someone was where they shouldn't be, but also long enough to recognize genuine desperation when he saw it. "Save a boy's life," he repeated, keeping his voice low. "What boy?" "Robert Alden's son," Cameron answered quickly. "The boy with the neurological symptoms. He's being poisoned by carbon monoxide and no one here has realized it yet. I know because my brother went through the same thing. I tried to warn the front desk, but they sent me away. Please, I'm not crazy. I know what I'm talking about." Marcus glanced at the partially visible badge under her jacket. East Harlem General Hospital. He knew the place. He had worked there years ago before getting this better-paying job in the private sector. "Are you a doctor?" he asked, but his tone already indicated he knew the answer. "Housekeeping," Cameron admitted, without lowering her eyes. "But that doesn't mean I don't know what I'm talking about. I've studied, I've researched, I've lived it. That boy has all the signs of carbon monoxide poisoning, and if no one realizes it soon, he's going to die or be left with lifelong damage, just like my brother." Marcus let go of her arm and ran a hand over his face, clearly in a dilemma. He had a job to do. He had rules to follow. But he also had a daughter the same age as that boy. If it were her in there, he would want someone to do whatever it took to save her, regardless of protocol. "Look," he said finally, "I can't just let you into the ICU. If anyone finds out, I'll lose my job, and you'll be arrested for trespassing." Cameron felt tears burn her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "So what do I do? Stand here while a boy dies because I don't have the right degree or the right last name to be heard?" Marcus was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed deeply. "I'll do this. I'll talk to the head nurse on shift. Beatrice is good people. If anyone here is going to give you a chance to be heard, it's her. But you stay here, and don't move, you understand? If I take you in there and you're wrong, we're both screwed." "I'm not wrong," Cameron said, with a firmness that came from a deep place within her. "I know what I'm saying." Marcus nodded and pushed open the ICU door. Cameron stayed outside, leaning against the wall, trying to calm her racing heart. She could see silhouettes moving through the frosted glass. She could hear the constant beeping of monitors, the soft sound of voices conversing in professional tones. Somewhere in there was the boy she had to save. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 5 minutes, Marcus returned, accompanied by a woman in her 50s with grey hair tied in a tight bun and a tired but kind expression. She was wearing navy blue scrubs and holding a clipboard. "So you're the woman who says she knows what's wrong with the Alden boy?" Nurse Beatrice said, getting straight to the point. "Yes, ma'am. I know this might sound crazy, but please hear me out. I work in housekeeping at East Harlem General. I heard the news on the radio about his case. The symptoms are exactly the same as what my brother had 5 years ago, carbon monoxide poisoning." Beatrice crossed her arms. "The doctors have already run every possible test. There's nothing indicating poisoning." "Because they haven't run the right test," Cameron explained, the urgency clear in her voice. "A standard pulse oximeter doesn't detect carbon monoxide. It mistakes carboxyhemoglobin for oxyhemoglobin. The saturation will appear normal even when the patient is being poisoned. They need to do a specific arterial blood gas test to measure the carboxyhemoglobin levels. It's the only way to be sure." Beatrice raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the technical knowledge. "And how does a member of the cleaning staff know this?" "Because I had to learn," Cameron replied, her voice softening. "After my brother was poisoned and almost died because no one knew what to do in time, I swore I would never be ignorant again. I read everything I could find. I talked to doctors, technicians, anyone willing to explain it to me. I know I don't have a degree, but I know what I'm talking about. Please, just let me see the boy. Let me confirm if the symptoms match." Beatrice exchanged a look with Marcus. The security guard shrugged. a look of cautious hope on his face. He was clearly rooting for Cameron to be right. The nurse sighed. "Look, I can't just let a stranger into the ICU." "But," she paused, studying Cameron's determined face, "I can let you take a look through the window of his room. His father is in there with Dr. Henry right now. If you can give me solid arguments that make sense, I can take your theory to the doctor in charge. But that's all I can do." It was more than Cameron had hoped for. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." Beatrice led her through the ICU doors. The environment was different from anything Cameron was used to in the public hospital where she worked. Everything here was cleaner, newer, quieter. The rooms had large glass windows that allowed the medical team to observe patients without constantly entering. The lights were soft, designed not to disturb the rest of the sick. Even the air seemed purer, filtered by state-of-the-art ventilation systems. Beatrice stopped in front of one of the rooms and Cameron felt her stomach tighten. Through the glass she could see a small boy lying in the bed, surrounded by machines. Lucas Alden had dark hair and a worrying pallor. There were tubes connected to him, monitors flashing with numbers and graphs. Beside the bed was a man in his 40s, his expensive suit wrinkled, his tie loosened, his face marked by exhaustion and fear. Robert Alden, the father. On the other side of the room, a doctor in a white coat checked the monitors with an expression of evident frustration. Cameron observed Lucas with professional attention. The bluish color of his lips, the irregular breathing, the sweat on his forehead despite the room's controlled temperature, the way his fingers twitched involuntarily, all the signs she had memorized from the books and articles she had compulsively read over the last 5 years. "That's him," she said in a low voice. "All the signs are there, the cyanosis of his lips, the irregular breathing, the muscle contractions. And look at the numbers on the monitor. The heart rate is unstable, but the oxygen saturation is showing normal levels. That's exactly what happens with carbon monoxide poisoning. The oximeter is lying." Beatrice looked at the monitors, then at Cameron. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I saw my brother. Look exactly like this," Cameron replied, the memories flooding back. "And because his headaches get worse at night, don't they? And he gets better during the day when he's out of the house. It's a pattern. The carbon monoxide is coming from somewhere in his house. Probably a poorly installed heater, a faulty generator, something that releases the gas when it's running. During the day, he's away from the source. At night, he's exposed again." Beatrice bit her lower lip, clearly considering the possibility. "Wait here," she said, and entered the room. Cameron stood outside, her hands pressed against the cold glass. She could see Beatrice talking to Dr. Henry, pointing to the monitors to Lucas, gesturing as she explained. The doctor seemed skeptical at first, but then Beatrice said something that made him stop and think. Robert Alden, who until then had been sitting with his head down beside his son, looked up, clearly paying attention to the conversation. After a few minutes, Dr. Henry came out of the room and approached Cameron. He was a man in his mid-50s, with greying hair, metal-framed glasses, and an expression of professional skepticism, but not hostility. "Beatrice told me your theory," he began. "I must admit it's interesting, but we've already run dozens of tests. Everything is normal." "A pulse oximeter can give a false positive reading in the presence of carbon monoxide," Cameron said, repeating what she had learned. "CO binds to hemoglobin with much greater affinity than oxygen. Carboxyhemoglobin absorbs light at the same wavelengths as oxyhemoglobin, so the oximeter can't tell the difference. The saturation will appear normal even when the patient is critically hypoxic." Dr. Henry took off his glasses and cleaned the lenses, clearly buying time to process the information. "Did you study medicine?" he asked. "No," Cameron admitted, "but I have studied carbon monoxide poisoning extensively. My brother almost died from it 5 years ago. I learned out of necessity." The doctor put his glasses back on and looked at her with a new expression, something between respect and curiosity. "Mr. Alden wants to speak with you," he said finally. "And to be honest, after 3 days of not being able to find a cause, I'm willing to consider possibilities I would normally dismiss. Come in." Cameron felt her legs weaken slightly, but she held herself steady. She walked through the door of the room, and for the first time came face to face with the boy she had come to save. Lucas was awake, but his eyes were glazed over, his expression confused. When Cameron approached the bed, however, something changed. His eyes focused on her, and he weakly extended his hand. Cameron, following her instinct, took his small, cold hand. "You came to help me," Lucas whispered, his voice hoarse. "I did," Cameron replied, squeezing his hand gently. "And I'm going to help you, I promise." "Who are you?" Robert Alden asked, standing up from his chair. His voice wasn't hostile, but there was a hardness to it, the tone of a man accustomed to being in control and who was rapidly losing it. "My name is Cameron Scott. I work in housekeeping at East Harlem General Hospital. I heard the news about your son on the radio and recognized the symptoms. I came to try to help." Robert looked her up and down, sizing her up. "A cleaning lady," he repeated. "And you think you know what a team of doctors educated at the best universities couldn't figure out?" Cameron remained calm. "It's not a matter of thinking I know more. It's a matter of recognizing a specific pattern. My brother went through the exact same thing 5 years ago. Carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty generator. The symptoms are identical. And I can tell you one thing." She turned to look directly into Robert's eyes. "Your son gets worse at night and better during the day. The headaches are terrible when he's at home, but they improve when he leaves. That's a classic pattern of intermittent exposure to a fixed source of carbon monoxide." Robert turned pale. "How do you know that about the headaches?" "Because it's always like that," Cameron explained. "Carbon monoxide builds up in enclosed spaces. During the day when he's away, his body tries to recover. At night, when he returns to the contaminated environment, he's poisoned again. It's a vicious cycle." Dr. Henry approached. "There's a way to confirm this. An arterial blood gas test with a specific measurement of carboxyhemoglobin. It's not a routine test, which is why we haven't done it yet. But if she's right, the levels will be elevated." Robert looked at his son, then at Cameron, then at the doctor. "Then do the test," he ordered. "Now." Dr. Henry nodded to a nurse who was standing outside. "We'll draw the arterial blood right now. The results take about 30 minutes. As the medical team prepared for the blood draw, the room door opened again and a woman entered. She was around 40, in an impeccable suit, with perfectly styled blonde hair and an expression of authority and irritation. Her ID badge identified her as Patricia Vance, Executive Director of Alden Properties. "Robert, what's going on here?" she asked, casting an icy glare at Cameron. "Who is this person?" "Someone who may have discovered what's wrong with Lucas," Robert replied, without taking his eyes off his son. Patricia came closer, assessing Cameron with ill-disguised contempt. "She doesn't look like a doctor," she said, her tone sharp. "I'm not," Cameron admitted, "but I know what I'm talking about." Patricia let out a dry laugh. "Robert, are you so desperate that you're listening to anyone who shows up with a wild theory? This woman is probably after money." Cameron felt her anger rise, but Beatrice, who had been observing from the corner of the room, intervened. "With all due respect, Ms. Vance, her theory makes medical sense, and Dr. Henry has already ordered the test to confirm it." Patricia opened her mouth to reply, but Robert raised his hand. "Enough, Patricia. If there's a chance, however small, that this woman is right, I'm going to investigate it. It's my son who's dying, not yours." The executive closed her mouth, but the look she gave Cameron was pure venom. She moved to the corner of the room, arms crossed, clearly furious at being contradicted. The blood draw was done quickly. Lucas moaned in pain as the needle entered his radial artery, and Cameron squeezed his hand, whispering words of comfort. When the nurse left with the sample, a tense silence fell over the room. Cameron stood by the bed, still holding Lucas's hand. Robert was sitting again, his head in his hands. Dr. Henry checked the monitors every few minutes. Patricia was typing furiously on her phone, probably texting someone at the company. The 30 minutes dragged on like hours. Cameron used the time to observe Lucas more closely. She noticed small details, the same ones she had noticed in Jacob. The way he furrowed his brow even in his sleep, indicating a persistent headache. The slight tremor in his hands. The breathing that, although assisted by machines, didn't seem natural. She also noticed something else. There was a photo on the bedside table. Lucas smiling next to a swimming pool, holding a swimming trophy. The pool had what looked like a pump house in the background. Cameron felt a chill. Pool heaters. If there was a gas heater that was poorly installed or improperly maintained. Finally, the door opened and a lab technician entered with an envelope. Dr. Henry took the paper, put on his glasses, and read in silence. His expression gradually changed from expectation to shock. The carboxyhemoglobin levels are at 28%, he said, his voice controlled but with a tone of urgency. That is far above the limit considered safe. She was right. It's carbon monoxide poisoning. The room erupted in activity. Nurses rushed in. Dr. Henry started giving orders rapidly. 100% oxygen. Prepare for transfer to a hyperbaric chamber. Check blood levels every 15 minutes. Robert was on his feet, relief and fear warring in his expression. Is he going to be okay? He asked the doctor. Now that we know what it is, we can treat him properly, Dr. Henry replied. But we need to act fast. The ideal treatment is hyperbaric oxygen. We're transferring him to the hospital that has the chamber. Cameron moved away from the bed to give the medical team space to work. She leaned against the wall, suddenly feeling the full exhaustion of the night wash over her. She had done it. They had believed her. Lucas was going to get the right treatment. Robert approached her. You saved my son's life, he said, his voice thick with emotion. How can I thank you? Before Cameron could answer, Patricia intervened again. Robert, we need to talk in private. She pulled the businessman into the hallway. Cameron couldn't hear what they were saying, but she could see through the glass. Patricia was gesturing intensely, clearly arguing something. Robert was shaking his head, his expression growing more and more serious. Beatrice came over to Cameron. You did an incredible thing here today, she said in a low voice. I don't know if anyone has ever told you this, but you have a real talent for medicine. Have you ever thought about going to college? Cameron gave a humorless laugh. With what money? I can barely pay my rent. Before Beatrice could reply, Robert returned to the room, Patricia close behind him. His expression was different now, more closed off, more cautious. Ms. Scott, he began, and Cameron felt her stomach sink. She knew that tone. Something had changed. My legal team has advised me to be careful about what I say or promise at this time. There are issues of civil liability involved. The source of the carbon monoxide needs to be identified and properly investigated. Cameron blinked, confused. I'm not asking for anything, sir. I just wanted to help. I understand, Robert continued, but now there was a stiffness in his voice. That wasn't there before. And I appreciate your help, but for now I think it's best if you go home. We'll take it from here. Cameron looked at Patricia, who had a look of ill-disguised satisfaction on her face. It was her. She had said something that made Robert back down. That made him put legal protection above gratitude, but Cameron wasn't leaving without saying what needed to be said. Mr. Alden, she said firmly, you need to have your house inspected immediately, especially any gas-powered equipment, heaters, generators, the pool heating system. Whatever is releasing the carbon monoxide is still there. And as long as it is, it's a danger not just to Lucas, but to anyone who enters that house. Robert nodded. I've already given the order for a team to go there right now. Good. Cameron took a deep breath. Then I'll leave. But if you need any more information about the treatment, about the symptoms, about anything, please find me. I'll leave my contact information with Nurse Beatrice. She turned to leave, but Lucas's voice stopped her. Cameron, the boy called out weakly, thank you for not giving up on me. Cameron went back to the bed and held his hand one more time. You're welcome, Lucas. You're going to be okay now, I promise, and when you get out of here, you'll be able to go back to swimming, to school, to doing everything you love. You just need to focus on getting strong. Lucas smiled faintly and closed his eyes. Cameron let go of his hand and left the room without looking back. Marcus was waiting outside. He saw the expression on her face and understood immediately. They sent you away, he said, not as a question. Cameron nodded. But it's okay. The important Thing is that he's going to get the right treatment now. That's why I came. Marcus walked her to the exit. When they reached the back door through which she had entered, he stopped. You're brave, he said. And smart. Don't let anyone make you think otherwise. Cameron smiled wearily. Thanks, Marcus, for believing in me when I needed it most. She stepped out into the cold early morning. The rain had stopped completely now, and the sky was beginning to lighten in the east. Dawn would be breaking soon. Cameron looked at the hospital building behind her, at the light still on in the upper floors. Inside, Lucas was being prepared for transfer. Inside, doctors who had ignored her were now following her instructions. Inside, a boy would have a second chance at life. And that would have to be enough, even if she was going home with no recognition, no official gratitude. Nothing but the certainty that she had done the right thing. Cameron started walking towards the bus stop, but stopped when she saw a familiar figure coming in the opposite direction. It was Mrs. Irene, her landlady, a woman in her late 60s with short, white hair wearing a thick coat against the morning chill. But what was she doing here at this hour? Cameron, Mrs. Irene called, quickening her pace. Thank God I found you. I need to talk to you. It's about that boy's case. Cameron stood frozen for a second, trying to process Mrs. Irene's unexpected presence there, in front of that hospital, at 5:30 in the morning. Her landlady was not an early riser. In fact, after retiring from her job as a medical technician 10 years ago, she rarely left the house before 9 a.m. Mrs. Irene, what are you doing here? Cameron asked, concern evident in her voice. The older woman came closer, breathing heavily from her hurried walk. I was watching the news on television last night when I heard about the boy. I recognized the symptoms, just like you did. But something was bothering me, something didn't fit. Then I remembered that a few months ago, when I still kept in touch with some old colleagues from the medical field, I heard some gossip about Alden Properties. Cameron frowned. What kind of gossip? Mrs. Irene pulled a crumpled folder from the large bag she was carrying. I have a friend, Regina, who worked for years as a maintenance coordinator for several luxury condominium buildings. She retired last year, but she kept everything. Reports, documents, records. She always said that one day it would be useful to protect herself if anyone tried to blame her for an accident. And what does this have to do with Lucas? Mrs. Irene opened the folder and took out some papers. When you rushed out of the hospital last night, I called Regina. I asked if she had any records related to the Alden mansion, and she did. She worked there until 6 months ago. These are the maintenance reports for the pool heating system, and look what's here. She pointed to a date, 48 hours before Lucas was admitted. In the report, there was a note in red ink. Heating system showing blockage in the exhaust fan. Risk of carbon monoxide buildup. Urgent recommendation for shutdown and immediate repair before use. Beneath the note was a signature. Regina had identified the problem and recommended the correct action. But just below it, there was another note, this one in blue pen in a different handwriting. Repair postponed by administrative decision. Corporate event. Scheduled for the same weekend. Heated pool required for reception of VIP guests. The signature under this second note made Cameron's blood run cold. Patricia Vance. The same executive who was in Lucas's room, who had convinced Robert to back down on his thanks, who looked at Cameron as if she were trash. She knew, Cameron whispered, feeling the anger rise. She knew there was a risk, and she ordered the pool to be used anyway. Mrs. Irene nodded gravely. Regina was so furious at the time that she documented everything, took photos, kept copies. She knew it could cause trouble, but she was just an employee. Who was going to believe her against a powerful executive? Just like me, Cameron said bitterly, always the same for us. But now you have proof. Mrs. Irene put the papers back in the folder and handed it to Cameron. And the boy is alive to confirm the story. This woman can no longer sweep this under the rug. Cameron held the folder with trembling hands. This changes everything. She looked at the hospital building. I need to show this to Robert Alden. He needs to know that the person he trusts is responsible for what happened to his son. I'm going with you, Mrs. Irene said firmly. Regina gave me permission to present these documents. and I've worked in the medical field long enough to know how these things work. You need someone with credentials by your side, even if they're old ones." The two women walked back to the hospital. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. The city was slowly waking up. Delivery trucks moved through the streets. A few early morning workers waited at bus stops. New York never completely stopped, but there was a different quality to those early hours of the day, a brief pause before the urban chaos resumed. At the hospital reception, the same woman from the previous night was finishing her shift. When she saw Cameron, her expression immediately hardened. "You again? I already told you can't just come in here." Cameron took a deep breath, reminding herself that losing her temper wouldn't help. "I need to speak with Mr. Robert Alden. It's urgent. I have information about his son's case." The receptionist was about to refuse again when Mrs. Irene stepped forward, pulling her old medical technician badge from her pocket. "Good morning. My name is Irene Cardoso. I'm a retired medical technician, and I have important documentation related to the poisoning of patient Lucas Alden. These are official maintenance records that indicate criminal negligence. I suggest you notify Mr. Alden immediately, or you will be the one answering for obstruction of an investigation when the authorities arrive." The professional tone and the mention of legal consequences made the receptionist hesitate. She picked up the phone and, after a brief conversation, gestured for them to wait in the seating area. 10 minutes later, Marcus appeared. When he saw Cameron, he smiled slightly. "I knew you'd be back. Come on, Mr. Alden has agreed to see you in the administrative office." They followed Marcus through different corridors this time, more elegant ones, clearly the area where VIP patients and their families were attended to. The walls had expensive paintings, the floors were polished hardwood, and there were leather sofas in the waiting areas. It was a completely different world from the rest of the hospital. Robert Alden was in a large office, sitting behind a mahogany desk. He looked even more exhausted than the night before. He hadn't slept, that was obvious. When Cameron and Mrs. Irene entered, he stood up, but his expression was cautious. "Ms. Scott, I thought we had concluded our conversation." "Mr. Alden, I'm sorry to insist, but this is important." Cameron placed the folder on the desk. "These are documents that prove not only the source of the carbon monoxide, but also that someone in your company was aware of the danger and chose to ignore it." Robert opened the folder and began to read. Cameron watched his expression gradually change, first confusion, then disbelief, then a cold anger. That made the air in the office feel heavier. He reached Regina's report, read the urgent recommendation for shutdown, and then saw Patricia's note authorizing the use of the pool despite the risk. His jaw tightened. He read the document 3 times, as if expecting the words to change. "When was this filed?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. 48 hours before Lucas was admitted," Mrs. Irene answered. "On the same weekend, the company held that event for foreign investors. The pool needed to be working to impress the guests. Your son's life was put on the back burner for high corporate display." Robert slammed the folder shut. "Where is Patricia now?" "She went to the company office about an hour ago," Marcus said. "Said she needed to take care of some urgent matters." "She's definitely trying to cover this up," Cameron said. "Mr. Alden, with all due respect, Ms. Vance knew the risk. She prioritized the company's image over safety. And when I brought the solution, she tried to discredit me, tried to get you to send me away before I could cause problems. She's more concerned with protecting the company from lawsuits than with doing what's right." Robert pressed his fingers to his temples. "I trusted her. For years I trusted her. She managed everything related to the properties, the projects, the maintenance. I was so focused on closing deals, on expanding the company, that I delegated too much. And now I find out that this delegation almost cost my son his life." He picked up the phone and dialed a number. When someone answered on the other end, he said with absolute firmness, "I want Patricia Vance at the hospital in 30 minutes. I don't accept excuses. If she refuses, send security to get her and ask the legal department to send someone as well. We're going to need them." He hung up and looked at Cameron and Mrs. Irene. "Thank you for bringing this to me. I know it wasn't easy to come back here after how I treated you last night." "I was," he paused, searching for the right words. "I was scared. And when you're scared, sometimes you listen to the wrong people." You listened to the person who wanted to protect you from legal liability, Mrs. Irene said gently. It's understandable. But now you know the truth. The question is what you're going to do with it. Before Robert could answer, his cell phone rang. It was Dr. Henry. Robert put it on speaker. Doctor, any news? Mr. Alden. The doctor's voice sounded tense. We're having a complication. Lucas is being prepped for transfer to the hyperbaric chamber, but his heart rate is becoming increasingly unstable. The carboxyhemoglobin levels are still very high. His body isn't responding to the 100% oxygen as quickly as we'd hoped. Cameron stood up immediately. Can I speak to Dr. Henry? Robert nodded and pushed the phone towards her. Dr. Henry, this is Cameron Scott. Is the saturation the monitors are showing still looking normal? Yes, 98%. It's a lie, Cameron spoke quickly, urgently. His body is collapsing, but the oximeter isn't detecting it because it's measuring incorrectly. He needs hyperbaric oxygen now, not in 30 minutes. Every second counts. The carboxyhemoglobin is building up faster than his body can process it. If you wait for the routine transfer, it could be too late. There was a pause on the other end. Then Dr. Henry's voice, firmer now. You're right, I'm initiating the emergency protocol, immediate transfer. And Cameron, thank you. Again. The call ended. Cameron sat down again, her legs weak. Robert was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. There was respect there, but also something deeper. Shame, perhaps. Shame for having taken so long to listen. My son is alive because you refused to take no for an answer, he said in a low voice. Because you fought against every person who tried to silence you, and I was almost one of those people. You were protecting your family, Cameron said. I understand that. I would do the same for my brother. Your brother, Robert remembered. You said he went through the same thing. Did he recover? Cameron looked down at her hands. He survived, but he has permanent damage. Memory loss, concentration problems, severe anxiety. He can't work like he used to. He can't study. The dreams he had just disappeared because that gas destroyed parts of his brain, and all because no one identified the problem in time. Robert closed his eyes, clearly imagining what could have happened to Lucas if Cameron hadn't insisted. How much do you want? He asked suddenly. Name your price, any amount. You saved my son. Cameron shook her head. I don't want your money, Mr. Alden. That's not why I came. Then why? Robert leaned forward. Why risk so much for someone you don't even know? Because I couldn't save my brother in time, Cameron answered, her voice choked with emotion. Because for 5 years I've lived with the guilt of not being able to make anyone listen to me. And when I heard those symptoms on the radio last night, it was like God was giving me a second chance, an opportunity to do things differently, to save someone before it was too late. I couldn't waste that. Before the conversation could continue, the door burst open. Patricia Vance stormed in like a hurricane, her face red with anger. Robert, what is the meaning of this urgent summons? I was in the middle of important meetings. Robert stood up slowly, picked up the folder with the documents and threw it across the desk towards her. It means you have a lot to explain. Patricia opened the folder and her expression changed instantly. The anger gave way to something like controlled panic. She closed the folder quickly. Robert, I can explain. The situation was complex. There were deadlines, commitments to investors, millions of dollars at stake. And my son's life, Robert said, his voice dangerously calm. Where did that fall in your equation of priorities? We had no way of knowing something would happen, Patricia argued, but she was already on the defensive. It was a remote possibility, a calculated risk. A risk with a child's life. Robert slammed his hand on the desk. You read the report. You saw the recommendation for an immediate shutdown, and you chose to ignore it because a corporate event was more important. It was a business decision, Patricia insisted. I protected the company's interests. I protected your interests, Robert. You almost killed my son to protect a damn event. Robert came around the desk, standing face to face with her. And when this woman here, he pointed to Cameron, came with the solution, you tried to get me to send her away. You tried to convince me she was an opportunist. All to protect what? to protect yourself from being found out. Patricia looked at Cameron with pure hatred. All this because of this cleaning lady. Robert, you're letting a nobody destroy the structure we built together. That nobody has more integrity in her little finger than you have in your entire body, Robert retorted. And unlike you, she didn't hesitate to do the right thing, even when everyone tried to stop her, including me. He went back behind his desk and pressed the intercom. Yes, Mr. Alden, the secretary's voice replied. Patricia Vance is terminated, effective immediately. Security is to escort her from the building. She is to collect her personal belongings from the company office under supervision and turn in all keys, access cards, and company property. An attorney will be in contact with her regarding the legal implications of her decisions and inform the legal team that I want a full investigation into every maintenance decision she has authorized in the last 5 years. Robert, Patricia tried again, but he held up his hand. No, it's over. Get out. 2 security guards appeared at the door. Patricia looked around the room, as if hoping someone would intervene on her behalf. But there was no one. She grabbed her purse with sharp movements and left, the guards following her every step. When the door closed, Robert sank into his chair, looking as if he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. He was silent for a long moment, then looked at Cameron. I built an empire, he said slowly. Buildings, condos, projects all over the city. And in the process, I lost touch with the things that really matter. I outsourced responsibilities to people who only saw numbers on spreadsheets, not lives. I became part of a system where people like you are ignored and people like Patricia are promoted, and it almost cost my son his life to make me realize that. You can't change the past, Mrs. Irene said gently, but you can decide what to do now. Robert nodded. You're right. And what I'm going to do is create a public safety foundation with significant initial funding. $10 million to start. The focus will be on inspecting dangerous systems in vulnerable communities. Heaters, generators, gas systems, anything that can cause silent poisoning. And I want you, he looked at Cameron, to run this project. Cameron blinked, sure she had misheard. What? You have the knowledge. You have the passion. You have the lived experience that no degree can teach. And most importantly, you have the courage to do the right thing even when it's hard. You're exactly the kind of person I need. Mr. Alden, Cameron stammered. I don't have a college degree. I don't have experience in project management. I don't know if I'm qualified. Courage isn't learned in a classroom, Robert said firmly. Practical knowledge doesn't come from textbooks, and a sense of justice isn't certified by a diploma. You have what really matters. The rest we'll build together. The foundation will pay a dignified salary, offer full benefits, and if you want to complete your degree, we will fund your education. Cameron felt tears burn her eyes. It was more than she had ever dreamed of. It was a chance to turn Jacob's tragedy into something that could save other people. It was an opportunity to make her voice truly heard, not as an invisible employee, but as someone with real power to make a difference. But there's one condition, she said, wiping her tears. If I accept, I want Mrs. Irene to be hired as a technical consultant. And I want Marcus, the security guard who helped me last night, to be part of the team as well. They believed in me when no one else did. Robert smiled for the first time, since Cameron had met him. Done. The 3 of you will have contracts before the end of the week. At that moment, Robert's cell phone rang again. It was Dr. Henry. Mr. Alden, Lucas has arrived at the hyperbaric chamber. We are starting the treatment now. The prognosis is good. He should make a full recovery. Robert closed his eyes, his expression one of absolute relief. Thank you, Doctor, for everything. When he hung up, he looked at Cameron one more time. My son will live a full life because you refuse to accept silence as an answer. That's a debt I'll never be able to fully repay. But I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying. Cameron felt the weight of the past few years begin to lift. Jacob would no longer have to bear the consequences of what happened alone. And no other family would have to go through what they had been through. She had found her purpose. She had found her voice. And finally, after so long, she had found someone willing to listen. 6 months later, New York City awoke to a shy April sun breaking through the clouds. The city was in the rhythm of late autumn, with the trees beginning to lose their leaves, creating golden carpets on the sidewalks of the more wooded neighborhoods. It was a quiet morning, the kind that seemed to promise that good things were on the way. Cameron was in the new office of the Alden Public Safety Foundation, located in a modern commercial building in Midtown Manhattan. The space was large, with huge windows that offered a stunning view of the city. There were organized workstations, new computers, files with documents from all the ongoing projects, and a team of 15 people that Cameron had helped assemble over the past few months. She was sitting at her desk, reviewing the weekly inspection report, when Mrs. Irene came in with 2 cups of coffee. The former medical technician, now an official consultant for the foundation, had adapted perfectly to the new work pace. She trained the technical teams, reviewed safety protocols, and used her decades of experience to identify risks that others might overlook. 17 more homes inspected this week, Mrs. Irene said, placing one of the cups in front of Cameron. We found 3 generators with serious problems, a leaking gas heater, and 2 completely inadequate ventilation systems. All the families have been temporarily relocated while we make the repairs. Cameron took the report and flipped through the pages. Each number there represented a life potentially saved. Each inspection was a tragedy averted. They were numbers that had faces, names, stories. They were children who would not be orphaned, parents who would not lose children, siblings who would not have to carry guilt for the rest of their lives. How many people have we helped since we started? Cameron asked, more to herself than to Mrs. Irene. If we count all the inspections, repairs, educational talks and training sessions, we've directly impacted over 5,000 people. And indirectly, considering the families and surrounding communities, probably 3 times that. Cameron smiled, feeling a deep satisfaction she had never known before. 5,000 lives. It was a number impossible to fully process, but she tried. She tried to visualize each family, each child, each person who was now safe because someone had finally decided to listen to the voices that had always been ignored. The office door opened and Marcus walked in, now wearing a simple but well-cut suit instead of his security uniform. He had been promoted to Field Operations Coordinator, responsible for organizing the inspection teams and ensuring everything ran efficiently. It was a job that perfectly matched his protective nature and his keen sense of justice. "Cameron, we have visitors," he said with a smile, "and I think you'll want to see them personally." He stepped away from the door and Robert Alden entered, followed by Lucas. The boy had grown a few inches in the last 6 months. His face was rosy and healthy, his eyes bright with energy. He wore his school backpack slung over one shoulder and had a wide smile on his face. Cameron stood up immediately, her heart racing. "Lucas," she said, opening her arms. The boy dropped his backpack and ran to hug her. Cameron held him tightly, remembering that first night in the hospital when he was pale and weak, his lips blue, life slowly slipping away. Now he was pure vitality, the pure energy of someone who had a second chance and knew how to appreciate it. "You've grown so much," Cameron said, letting him go and looking at Robert. "How is he?" "Fully recovered." Robert had a look of permanent gratitude on his face whenever he looked at his son. "The doctors did the final tests yesterday. No residual damage, it's as if it never happened." "But it did happen," Lucas said seriously, mature beyond his 12 years. "And I'll never forget. You saved me, Cameron. You didn't give up on me when everyone else thought it wasn't worth listening to you." Cameron knelt to be at his eye level. "You were worth every second, every effort, every time they sent me away and I came back. And you know what's even better? Now, because of what happened to you, thousands of other people are being saved too. Your story is making a difference in the world." Lucas smiled and pulled something from his backpack. It was a drawing he had made, showing a woman in a white coat saving children from a grey cloud that represented carbon monoxide. At the top, written in coloured letters, it said, "Cameron, my hero." Cameron felt tears well up in her eyes. She took the drawing carefully, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Thank you, Lucas. I'm going to hang this up here in the office where everyone can see it. Robert put a hand on his son's shoulder. Actually, there's another reason for our visit. Lucas gets his final medical clearance today, and we wanted to invite you to a small celebration we're having. But first, he paused, there's something we'd like to show you. They left the office and went down to the garage where a driver was waiting with a car. The drive took about 20 minutes until they reached a neighborhood in the Bronx that Cameron recognized immediately. It was where she had grown up, where Jacob still lived with their mother. Robert, what are we doing? Here? Cameron asked, confused. You'll see, he replied with a mysterious smile. The car stopped in front of a recently renovated building. The walls were painted in light colors, there were gardens out front, and a new sign that read, "The Jacob Scott Community Health and Safety Center." Cameron got out of the car in a state of shock. Her brother's name was there, permanent, in large letters for everyone to see. She looked at Robert, unable to speak. "When you agreed to run the foundation, you said you were doing it to honor your brother," Robert explained. "So I thought, why not honor him more directly? This center will offer free medical consultations, talks on home safety, subsidized inspections, everything this community needs, and it will bear his name so that everyone knows that Jacob Scott matters, that his story matters." Cameron covered her face with her hands, the tears now falling freely. Mrs. Irene put an arm around her, also moved. Marcus discreetly wiped his own eyes. "There's more," Lucas said excitedly. "Come see inside." They entered the center, and Cameron saw that the reception area was full of people. There were neighbors she had known since childhood, old schoolmates, people from the community, and at the center of it all in a wheelchair was Jacob. Cameron ran to him and hugged him tightly. "Bro, what are you doing here? Why didn't you tell me?" Jacob smiled, that slightly crooked smile he'd had since the accident, but which could still light up any room. "Because I wanted it to be a surprise. Robert came to talk to me 2 months ago. He told me about this place, about putting my name on it. I didn't believe it at first, but he said I deserved to be remembered, not for the tragedy, but for what my story inspired, for what you did because of what happened to me." Cameron's mother approached, dabbing at her tears with a tissue. "My daughter," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "you turned our pain into something beautiful. You turned loss into salvation for so many people. Your father would be so proud." Cameron hugged her mother and Jacob together, feeling the weight of 5 years of guilt finally begin to dissipate completely. She hadn't saved Jacob in time, but she had saved Lucas, and because of Lucas she was saving thousands of others. The tragedy had not been in vain. The suffering had generated purpose. Robert clapped his hands to get everyone's attention. "Everyone, thank you for coming. Today is not just the day my son gets his final medical clearance. It's the day we officially open this center. And it's the day we announce a major expansion of the work that Cameron and her team have been doing." He gestured to an assistant who brought out a projection screen. "For the past 6 months, the Alden Public Safety Foundation has been doing extraordinary work. But it's not enough. Not for a city the size of New York. So over the past few weeks, I've been talking to other business owners, politicians, community leaders, and we are pleased to announce that 7 other major companies have committed to creating similar foundations in their areas of operation. Together, we will form a public safety network that will cover the entire metropolitan area." The room erupted in applause. Cameron looked around, seeing the hope on people's faces. It wasn't just about carbon monoxide. It was about being seen, being heard, being valued. It was about a system that was finally beginning to recognize that people on the margins mattered too. "And there's one more thing," Robert continued. "You may have heard of something called the Scott Protocol." His voice softened as he mentioned it. "It's a protocol being adopted by hospitals and companies across the country. The name comes from Cameron's last name, but it represents something much bigger. It represents the idea that we should always listen to the employees on the ground level, the people in the trenches, who see things that executives in their offices never see. How many tragedies could be avoided if we simply stopped to listen?" Cameron thought of all the times she had tried to speak and been ignored. She thought of how different it would have been if someone had listened when she talked about Jacob. She thought of how many other people around the world were trying to be heard at that very moment and being silenced by systems that valued hierarchy over wisdom, credentials over experience. But something was changing. Slowly, perhaps. But it was changing. After the formalities, after the speeches and photos, Cameron got a moment alone with Lucas on the center's rooftop. From there they could see the expanse of the city, the buildings spreading to the horizon, the countless lives happening in each lit window. "You know what I was thinking," Lucas said, leaning against the railing. "Before all this happened, I was just a lucky kid. I was born into a rich family. I never lacked anything. But I didn't understand anything about the real world, about people who work hard and still can't be heard, about people who know important things but are ignored because they don't have the right last name." "And now you understand," Cameron said softly. "Now I understand, and you know what else? When I grow up, I want to be like you. I want to use my privilege to amplify the voices of people no one listens to. I want to make a real difference, not just make money or build buildings." Cameron smiled, putting an arm around his shoulders. "You're going to do amazing things, Lucas, I'm sure of it. And the best part is you'll do it with empathy, because you know what it's like to be vulnerable." They stood there for a few minutes in comfortable silence, watching the city that had almost taken Lucas's life, but would now be a little safer because of the journey he had lived. When they went back inside, they found Robert talking with Mrs. Irene about expanding the training programs. Marcus was organizing a team to do inspections on the very building they were in, ensuring everything was safe. Jacob was surrounded by old friends, laughing at some joke, looking lighter than Cameron had seen him in years. Her mother approached again. "Daughter," she said, holding Cameron's hands, "I know you still carry guilt for what happened to Jacob. I see it in your eyes sometimes, but I need you to understand something. What happened to him was not your fault. You were a scared teenager desperately trying to make adults listen to you, and they failed, not you." Cameron nodded, feeling a lump in her throat. "I know, or at least I'm learning to believe it. And look what you've done with that pain." Her mother gestured around at the center, at the people. "You turned tragedy into a mission. You turned loss into purpose. You turned forced silence into a voice that now echoes across the country. Your father always said you had a special heart, and he was right, as the day began to end and people started to leave. Cameron found herself back in the Foundation's office, alone with her thoughts. She looked at the photo of Jacob she had put on the wall, right next to Lucas's drawing. Underneath the photo, she had placed a plaque with the words Robert had suggested. "Listen to the silent voices. They might save lives." Her cell phone buzzed. It was a message from a hospital in an upstate county. A young nurse had used the Scott protocol to report a problem with the oxygen system that the doctors hadn't noticed. Thanks to the protocol, she was taken seriously immediately. 5 patients were moved before the system failed completely. Lives were saved. Cameron saved the message in the folder she kept with all the protocol's success stories. There were already over 200. 200 times someone was heard and made a difference. 200 times the system worked the way it should always work. She turned off the office lights and left, taking the subway home as she did every night. She still lived in the same small apartment, still took the same crowded buses, was still the same Cameron who had cleaned hospitals 6 months ago. But she was also different. She carried within her the certainty that she had found her purpose, that her voice mattered, that she mattered. When she got home, Jacob was watching television in the living room. Their mother had made dinner and the 3 of them ate together, talking about the day, about the plans for the community center, about the future that finally seemed bright. Later, lying in bed, Cameron thought of Lucas. She thought of the pale boy in the hospital, the blue lips, the monitors lying about his oxygen saturation. She thought of how easy it would have been to give up, to walk away, to accept that no one would listen to her. But she didn't give up. And because she didn't, a boy was alive. A movement was growing. A culture was changing. She picked up her phone and opened her chat with Lucas. He had sent a photo of himself on the rooftop, arms open, smiling at the city. The caption just said, "Thanks for giving me a future." Cameron smiled, typed a quick reply, "Thanks for giving me a purpose," and turned off the light. The next day the work would begin again. There would be more inspections, more families to help, more silent voices needing to be heard. But for the first time in 5 years, Cameron felt that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The story of a cleaning lady who saved a magnate's son had become something much bigger. It had become a symbol. It had become hope. It had become proof that courage, knowledge, and compassion don't need a diploma to be valid. And as New York City slept around her, Cameron slept too, knowing that the next day she would wake up ready to continue the fight, ready to keep listening, ready to keep saving lives, one silent voice at a time, because in the end, this was never just a story about medicine or fortune. It was always about dignity, about recognizing the humanity in every person, regardless of where they work or how much money they have. About understanding that the hands that clean the hospitals can hold the cure, that the voices that were never heard can carry the answers everyone is looking for, and about having the courage to insist, to return, to refuse to accept silence when lives are at stake, about turning pain into purpose and tragedy into hope. It was about truly listening to those who were never heard, and about what can happen when we finally stop to listen. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Cameron and Lucas has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of courage and resilience, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment marked you the most. Every day we bring intense stories like this, one, which reveal the strength of the human spirit and the importance of listening to the voices that are often silenced. Your presence here makes all the difference. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions.